Hey there folks, and welcome back to the Gunners Guild. While I still don't have a build guide available, as there's just way too much stuff to collect and process, we do have another list of archetypes that we can quickly cover and review and place them in our tier list of archetypes. So these are going to be the unlockable archetypes that you can get in the game, and we'll just add them and compare them to our base archetypes. And we're going to do this the same as the last set, just covering all their skills and perks really quick while I talk about what I like and dislike about them, and then put them on my arbitrary tier list. So let's just go. We're going to start off going hot with Engineer, found in Narud. The Engineer is exactly what you'd expect from the name. It places turrets, but also you can carry their turrets around as a big ass heavy gun, which is pretty damn sick. Engineer definitely has unique gameplay style, and that's worth something. But for the Engineer, I need to rearrange the order in which I talk about stuff, because this one I'm going to have to start with the skills first, so the rest of the kit makes sense. So the skills for the Engineer. So each of the Engineer skills is a heavy weapon that you can carry or place as a turret, which does count as a summon, by the way. The turret will act independently, but you can push your skill button again when the turret is down to change the mode to have it fire wherever your reticle is pointing at. So you can have it focus fire if you want, or just free aim at whatever is nearby. Allies can also pick up the turret and run away with it as a heavy carry weapon, which is awesome. You can also overclock your turret if it's in your hands or in another player's hand or as a turret whenever. Anyway, the first heavy weapon is the Vulcan Cannon, which is a minigun essentially. I'm surprised there's no heat mechanic to it because that's a new weapon mechanic that the LMG has, but whatever. The Vulcan is just nasty, it's strong, and it's precise, and you feel like a damn god when you have it equipped. Like, you can just mow down constant hordes of enemies. No complaints about the Vulcan at all, it just crushes. The next skill, the Flamethrower, is a little weird to me. The range is pretty short and the fire doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. It's definitely made to clear a lot of little enemies, but it's not good for bosses or elites at all. It's unique in that it does all fire damage, so you can scale it off things that boost fire damage as well as skill damage, so it's got that going for it. But I don't particularly care for it. When placed as a turret though, the Flamethrower instead becomes a grenade launcher of sorts. It will shoot a fireball that does AoE damage and can attack from further ranges, which in my opinion is the better use for the Flamethrower rather than just carrying it. The last skill, the Impact Cannon, is essentially a railgun. It charges and shoots a piercing line through enemies for a lot of damage, and it causes a lot of stagger, making it great for dealing with elites. When placed as a turret, the Impact Cannon becomes a thumper and will release shockwaves that deal significant damage to pretty much anything nearby and stagger them, allowing you to use it as a zone of denial turret if you want. It's good stuff. So let's get back to the perks so I can explain why I had to do the skills first. So starting with the prime perk, Overclock. So what this does is allow the user to overclock their heavy weapons, either in their hands, as a turret, in another player's hands, doesn't matter. But Overclock gains additional fire rate and damage, as well as infinite ammo for a whopping 25 seconds, and that's a long ass time, with a pretty mild cooldown. And this can easily double the ammo you can throw out by using it when you're near empty to get an additional boost of ammo for 25 seconds. It's a crazy prime perk, to be honest. It's definitely the best part about Engineer. Next, we have the damage perk, Metal Worker. This provides us with a whopping 50% skill damage and 10% skill critical chance. On top of this, heavy weapons gain 50% more ammo capacity, more max health, and more weak spot damage. It's just crazy all around. Now what's interesting about this damage perk is that it provides the largest skill damage in the game, so it does feel almost mandatory to use it if you want to run any sort of skill damage based builds. But there's also no other damage type on this, so your guns, your mods, and your melee are all going to be significantly weaker compared to other classes. So you're basically forced to use the heavy carry as much as possible to limit your downtime on your basically damageless perk. And then we have the team perk, Magnetic Field. While you have your heavy weapon out, nearby allies will get 15% damage reduction as well as slowly generate ammo over time. And that's pretty dang hot in my opinion because you can set down your turret and it will provide the bonus to allies near your turret as well. Moving to the utility perk, Heavy Mobility, this provides us with increased movement speed and evade distance and evade speed while we have our heavy carry out, which is great to mitigate how slow it starts. This scales with the Engineer level, so movement starts out really slow, but does get better. The last perk, which is the Relic perk, Surplus, will restore 15% of the heavy weapon's ammo on relic use, and this is doubled if your heavy weapon is stowed, as well as drop any extra ammo for your allies or yourself. It's a pretty nice ammo generator, and a good way to sustain your heavy carry for as long as possible. And lastly, we have the trait Fortify, which increases your armor effectiveness by 50%. And this unironically is one of the best traits in the game as well. It provides you with a significant amount of damage reduction if you're already using heavy armor, and paired with something like Challenge or Strongback, you can get some real bulk for not much investment. Engineer definitely has a lot of unique situations where it can thrive, and it does its job very well in providing the player with a unique playstyle that does remain effective. It's a strong kit. However, Engineer loses basically the entire archetype and all of its bonuses when you're not using your heavy weapon. So you're forced into using them basically all the time, which is kind of limiting the build diversity for what you want to mix with, as well as the gear potential, since you pretty much have to run skill-based items to sustain your heavy carry mode. Overall, I'm kind of giving Engineer an A tier just because of how fun and unique and strong it is. Don't get me wrong, it's strong. It's just very limiting. I kind of wanted to go with B tier, but it's too powerful to put that low. Let's move on to the next unlockable archetype, the Alchemist from the Loathsome Sewers. I want to start by saying that the Alchemist is probably going to be the most underrated archetype. It's absolutely not flashy at all, but it does provide more utility than any other class, and the amount of creativity here is limitless. It's definitely the best generalist class, and you'll see what I mean. So first, let's talk about the Prime perk, which is the best Prime perk in the game, no joke. You get 3 extra concoctions. That's insane. You can only have 1 active at a time normally here in Remnant 2. So concoctions are flasks if you don't know. And these are a 60-minute buff that does something useful and will persist through death. So something like 25 more life or stamina, leech, extra armor, whatever. So Alchemist gets 4 total. So the Prime perk can be rewritten as something like you get 25 more HP, 25 more stamina, and 10% movement speed. Or you get 10% more mod generation, 6% HP, 6% stamina, 6% move speed, and 30 armor. Or 5% life leech, minus 10 encumbrance, and 25 HP. It's very, very flexible, and I love it, and it'll help you refine any build. Next, we have the damage perk, Liquid Courage. This is the same as the medic damage perk in that it's 25% all damage and 5% crit, no strings attached. This means Alchemist can functionally use ranged, melee, skill, and mod damage just as the medic can. Pairing this with medic is definitely a good choice, as you'll see as we continue. The next perk is Panacea. Curative effects apply to all allies within 15 meters and grant 15 to all resistances and 10 to blight resistances. So whenever you use something like a bandage or a bloodwort, you will buff nearby allies to get those as well, on top of giving them extra resistances. And status is hurt in Remnant 2, so this is a good one. The next perk, Gold to Lead, this one I don't really know. Picking up scrap or metal has a 15% chance to also grant ammo to you. Like, it's a pretty low percent chance, and you're not ever going to be picking up scrap and metal in most fights. It's usually just ammo, so you're not going to get much use out of it there. So I don't really see this being all that useful, to be honest. Lastly, we have the relic perk Experimentalist. This is a doozy. Using a relic gives you and all nearby allies a random buff for a minute. This buff can be anything from reload speed to life regen or haste. It's a nice extra buff to give everyone on relic use. And finally, the trait Potency. This increases all consumable duration by 100%, which obviously will make your concoctions last 2 hours, which is pretty crazy, but it also makes things like fairy dust and other injectables last 2 minutes instead of 1, which is enough time to keep them up during boss fights without having to just go full meth head like in Remnant 1. It's a subtle but very good trait. For the skills, Alchemist has a lot of good choices. All 3 skills are vials that can be slammed on the ground with a press or held and thrown like a grenade to create their effect at range, if you need to give it to an ally in a pinch or something. The first vial is Stone Skin, and this does everything you would want to tank. It gives you 25% damage reduction and -1 stagger, which means you're going to be an absolute unstoppable killing machine, but it also makes you immune to statuses and greatly increases your blight resistance, so you can use it to clear any statuses you have on you as well. The only downside is that the buff only lasts for 10 seconds and then 15 seconds after you leave the circle. So at most, it's going to be 25 seconds if you want to confine yourself to the pool, which is very, very strong regardless. I just don't like being confined in games like this. The next skill is Frenzy Dust, which is just like Frenzy Dust from Remnant 1, except that you can throw this one as well. It gives you 20% fire rate and reload speed, which is very nice, but again has the same 10-second duration plus 15 seconds outside the pool. It's a great offensive option nonetheless, but it's just limiting with how long it lasts. Lastly, we have the Elixir of Life. This vial provides a 20-second buff for anyone that steps in the pool that gives them 5 life regen per second. Low, but it's something. But the important thing is that if players die with the buff active, they automatically get revived. You can also throw the Violet players who are already down to revive them from downtown. It's a very cool ability. Alchemist, being the generalist, has skills for tanking, damage, and support. So Alchemist is the jack of all trades archetype, as I'd mentioned. It can provide many buffs to the player as well as allies, and I think they have the best prime perk in the game, which is their saving grace, but their skills kind of force players to remain in a certain area, which is detrimental to a degree. And to get the most out of Alchemists, players are going to have to invest in a lot of scrap to stock up on consumables and more concoctions. So it's going to be a while before the players can make full use of this archetype. So overall, I'm actually going to give Alchemist a B tier. I feel it's more flexible than anything else, including Medic. It's just not quite strong enough in any specific area to get a higher rank. And again, you have to dump a lot of scrap into this thing. It's definitely going to be the best archetype to pair with. It's definitely going to be the best archetype to pair with anything though, once you get enough scrap to sustain its consumable cost. The next archetype on this list is the Summoner from the Blood Moon Altar in Yesha. Summoner is a very interesting class and quite difficult to manage and use compared to other classes. It's got a lot going on with it, but let's dive in and you'll see. And like the Engineer, I do need to reorder this one, so we're going to start with the skills so that the rest of the kit makes sense. The first skill is Summon Root Hollows. You get 2 charges of these and can summon up to 2 of these Root Hollows, and each summon costs 15% of your HP to summon, though you can't die from summoning, so that's good to know. You can also hold the skill to sacrifice your minions, causing them to explode to deal damage to all nearby enemies. Sacrificing your minions reduces their skill cooldown based upon how much life they had, so if you sacrifice them at full, they recover 50% of their cooldown, and if you sacrifice them when they're almost dead, they recover like nothing. So you can use them to just sacrifice, summon, and sacrifice again for more of an explodey sacrifice playstyle, rather than just keeping them out permanently, which is interesting because it automatically right off the bat has 2 different styles of approach. Next skill is Summon Root Flyers. Again, you get 2 charges and can have 2. These guys only cost 10% of your HP to summon. They attack from afar, and when you sacrifice them, they spawn 3 homing rockets that fire at enemies, and they can potentially shotgun 1 enemy. Flyers are pretty good, I prefer these over anything else. The last skill is the Reaver, which is an elite enemy and you just get the 1, and he costs 35% of your HP to summon, and he has a long cooldown. His sacrifice explodes and drops into a lot of little additional explosives that bounce around and kill everything nearby. It's like a carpet bomb for the whole area. So all the skills that the Summoner have are basically 2 functional skills in one. You have a summon that can just go out and fight until it dies, and it's also a bomb that you can detonate at will. So now that you know that, let's talk about the perks and such. First is the prime perk Ruthless. When the Summoner is your prime archetype, you can shoot your summons to cause them to become enraged for 40 seconds. While enraged, minions get 50% increased damage, attack speed, and movement speed. They kind of just go crazy. And it's really easy to accidentally hit your summons or use some sort of AoE to trigger it, so it's kind of up a lot without actually having to manage it. You can also refresh the duration while it's already active, so yeah, pretty easy to sustain. Next is the damage perk Dominator. While you have a minion out, you have 35% increased mod and skill damage, as well as 5% mod and skill crit. So this class has the highest direct mod damage perk. On the flip side, if you sacrifice a minion, you will instead gain 30% ranged and melee damage and 5% crit for those 30 seconds, or until you summon a new minion. So as you can see, you kind of have to alternate between mod and skill damage and ranged and melee damage. It provides you with 2 styles of gameplay. Permanent minions, and you can just use that to stack skill damage for your minion damage and mods, and then you can sacrifice your minions to get more range damage and melee damage. Downside to this perk is that sacrificing your minions makes you lose your skill damage, which means you don't actually get skill damage bonuses for the sacrifice bombs. The next perk, Residue, makes it so whenever a minion dies or gets sacrificed, it leaves behind a little healing pool, which will restore 2.5% of your HP per second if you're standing in it. So basically you can recover all the HP lost when summoning them. It also provides you with bonus healing for some reason. The next perk, Outrage, grants you 3% life leech for each sacrificed minion, so 6% max, and 15% movement speed for 10 seconds when you sacrifice a minion. This is going to help you shift from the Summoner to the Exploder playstyle. The last perk, Incite, grants your minions 5% HP regen per second and 15% increased damage and crit chance for 30 seconds whenever you use a relic. That's a long time. Good for the permanent style for minions. The trait, Regrowth, gives you 1.5 HP per second, which doesn't seem like a lot. It's kind of not, but if you pair it with like Medic, with you have Triage and get 50% more, That's actually pretty good. 2.5 life per second adds up pretty quickly and helps to sustain your sacrifice style. So overall, the Summoner has a very interesting and cool kit, but of course, I have a problem with it. The first is that they only have their mod and skill damage when a summon is active, and when you're playing on Apocalypse or even high world level Nightmare, summons are not living very long. They're just not tanky enough, especially for bosses. You can't sustain them, and so it kind of kills the entire permanent minion playstyle. And then you just lost your damage perk, because you only get the ranged and melee damage if you sacrifice them, not just if they die. Plus then I also can't run a mod power build with Summoner since the minions keep dying and then I lose all the mod power. The other issue besides their survivability, which really only affects late game anyway, is that they just don't scale well. Damage wise, summons are pretty much fine, but defensively they just don't scale as well as enemies do, and because there's just not very many ways to scale their defense or damage, the sacrifice damage ends up being very low into Apocalypse. It does just very little damage for how much time it takes to summon and sacrifice the minions, and they're just gonna die anyway. And lastly, their AI is pretty bad. They often get run around or fall too far behind or just act weird and don't do anything, and as such, they're just not really reliable. So yeah, kind of a lot of negatives unfortunately. I really like the actual kit and the ability to swap between two types of action. The Summoner also gets to become super tanky with rings and trait that only affect summons. But it's a lot of investment and a lot of clunk for this class, and I just think it kind of fumbles at the higher difficulty sadly. It's great up until late game Nightmare, but after that, it just falls off. I'm gonna put Summoner in C tier for now. Maybe it'll get some improvements in the future, but right now it's just too much of a hassle to play. The next archetype on the to-do list is the Explorer, obtained from beating the game. Explorer is a really weird archetype because it's definitely not made for combat, but more for farming, and has such a unique style, and I just kind of love it, so let's talk about it. Explorer starts with the prime perk, Lucky. Lucky gives you a pretty good chance, 35%, to spawn additional items from elites, aberrations, and boss enemies. This can include relic fragments, scrap, metal, consumables, luminite, and corrupted luminite. Very useful for upgrading weapons and just, getting all your stuff done. The next perk is the damage perk, Scavenger. What this does is that each time you pick up anything, scrap, metal, ammo, whatever, you get a stack of Scavenger, which increases all your damage by 5% for 15 seconds, which does stack up to 5 stacks and 60 seconds. So it's 25% all damage and 5% crit regardless of stat count. 25% damage per minute is pretty good and not hard to sustain since any pickup helps. And then we have the team perk, Metal Detector, which grants your entire party 10% more ammo pickups, currency, and metals, plus an undisclosed chance at more consumables from a chest. For a passive perk, that's pretty nice. I mean, we're always going to need more scrap and metals, right? Next is the utility perk, Prospector. Relic fragments drop at a higher quality, and this is good regardless of how much it actually is. It's just better fragments, plus a 5% chance that double fragment drop means that you're going to get just a lot more relic dust because it's automatically going to convert into dust, which is pretty good. Lots of materials and lots of loot from Explorer. The last perk, Self-Discovery, is just icing on the cake. Using a relic instantly gives you 6 stacks of Scavenger, allowing you to go over that limit of 5 so that you get 30% all damage. It also prevents you from losing Scavenger stacks for 30 seconds. So you do have 90 seconds of 6 stacks. So you can just pop a relic when you see a boss or elite, and you're going to be good to go from there. I really like this relic perk. Moving on to the skills. The first skill is Planeswalker, the bread and butter skill. It's just basic. It increases your movement speed by 20% and reduces all stamina costs for all actions by 80% for 30 seconds. That is a long time, and the cooldown is pretty short. And this is a great skill for running through zones and collecting stuff, but also low-key amazing for melee builds as you can use charge swings for next to nothing. Very good skill indeed. So the next skill on the list is Gold Digger, and this is a pretty wacky fun skill that I want to love. You get 3 charges of it, and it has a very fast cooldown, and basically you get to dig into ground and dig up wells that provide you with a buff for 15 seconds. The wells themselves last 45 seconds, and then just touching them grants you the buff for 15 seconds. So you kind of need to keep going back to the well and touch it to get rebuffed. The wells can provide healing, all damage, haste, and damage reduction. I really like this skill a lot on paper, but it just kind of takes a long time to dig up the wells and forces the players to remain nearby these little tiny pools, which is very restricting for the player. It's hard to use these in a boss fight unless you get some break in the action just because of how long it takes to dig, and it's not really useful when traveling because you're just going to leave them behind and you have a 15-second buff, which doesn't really do much for you. I kind of wish the buff and skill duration were flipped and that the wells will last 15 seconds, but the buff they provide lasted 45 seconds, because then you can just touch it and run. Oh well. The last skill they have is Fortune Hunter. This is like Hunter's Mark, but for loot. You will highlight and see objects through walls, and basically any pickups that you need to grab, like rings, trait books, amulets, and chests. Sadly, it doesn't find things like simulacrums or quest items. Kinda wish it did. But it's a great skill for when you're just looking for gear and wrapping up your item collection. So the Explorer. This is a very funky archetype. It's not bad at all. It's actually got one of the best damage perks in my opinion. 30% all damage is very nice. And it has a fun variety of perks to increase all your drop rates and help you upgrade your gear faster, and has some very interesting skills that all have some very unique uses. Overall, it's got a really good vibe to it and a really good archetype to pair with anything else. So I'm gonna give Explorer B tier. Okay, last archetype we have here is the Invader from Root Earth. Invader is crazy stylish and very unique. It's the ninja class of Remnant 2. And there's nothing I don't like about it. So spoiler, but let's just start talking about it because it's amazing. Starting off with the big seller for Invader, the prime perk, Shadow. Performing any Invader skill leaves behind a decoy for 3 seconds that taunts enemies and draws their aggro. And you deal 15% more damage to enemies looking at the decoy, which is very nice. The damage perk, Shark, is interesting. You need to be sprinting or evading, but for every second you sprint or evade, you get 1 stack of momentum. Momentum grants 7% range and melee damage per stack and critical chance by 1% per stack. So when you're maxed, you have 35% range and melee damage and 5% crit. And this lasts 15 seconds, but it's really easy to sustain since you should always be moving or dodging. So like a shark, don't stop moving. The next perk, Loophole, kinda odd to me. It gives allies bonus leech against enemies that are looking at your decoy, so you kind of need the prime perk for the team perk to work as well, but with one exception that you'll see later. Next is Circumvent, the utility perk. This reduces the cost of evades and slides by 15%, but if you manage to perfect dodge the attack, it reduces the cost by 30%. That's a lot of stamina cost reduction for free, to be honest. It's a really good perk. The last perk, Override, gives you an additional threat for 10 seconds, which is the exact opposite of what I feel like this hit wants, but it does let you spawn a longer lasting decoy if you perfect dodge during that time. So you get aggro to remove aggro and use your other perks, I guess. I don't know. It's a weird one to me. Not a huge fan of it. I wish it put you into like a stealth mode when you use a relic instead, but you know, whatever, it's got uses. Anyway, let's talk about the skills. Skill 1 is Void Cloak, but if you've played Monster Hunter World, it goes by the name Temporal Mantle. This skill will last for 60 seconds and will perfect dodge all hits for the duration, so you can trigger stuff that would activate on perfect dodge. But depending on the size of the hit, it will reduce the duration more and more. And each time you avoid an attack, you will spawn a decoy which will take aggro, which is very cool and quite crutch to be honest. I like it though. Next skill is my favorite skill in the entire game, Wormhole. It works like Blink Token in Remnant 1, where you can just teleport ahead or hold it and teleport wherever you release it. But what's cool about the skills is that it has iframes for a second, so you don't actually instantly get hit like you did with Blink Token. And when you come out of the blink, your next single ranged or melee hit does 300% damage. So grab those single shot weapons or your big greatsword. This thing packs a punch and also pairs extremely well with the Challenger. The other cool thing is that if you teleport behind an enemy, you will automatically rotate and face the enemy, so you don't have to like spin around really quick. Plus, you get 2 charges and the cooldown is only 45 seconds, which can be reduced, so it's really not that bad. I love Wormhole so much, and you get some pretty stylish clips with it. But before I drool over that for too long, let's talk about the other skill, Reboot. When you activate Reboot, you keep a record of your health, stamina, relic charges, ammo, and debuffs for 30 seconds. Then at any point in those 30 seconds, you can click on the skill again to restore to the previous state and release a decoy taunt for the moment. This skill will automatically reboot yourself if you die during the state as well, which is pretty insane as the skill itself only has a 1-minute cooldown, so you can reboot a lot. Just don't get stuck in the mainframe. So the Invader class is a class very well designed around avoiding damage and a lot of mobility. It makes for an excellent pair to either ranged or melee builds and offers a lot of utility in decoys, increased iframes, and the skills it provides to be either tankier or more offensive. Invader is awesome, and I genuinely believe it's the most fun archetype out there. I'm putting it in a solid A tier just because it's not quite as strong as like Hunter and Gunslinger, but it does provide good times all around. And alright, that's going to be it for me. This is where archetypes kind of landed on our tier list and how everything ended up. Feel free to disagree and comment why. I'm probably not going to see it though, unless you join my Discord and yell at me there. But yeah, thanks and good luck out there, people.